is Ian Mitchell. I'm on the board of directors of the Ketamine-Assisted Therapy Association of Canada, and I'm an emergency medicine physician in Kamloops, British Columbia. I've provided care for countless patients who've been brought to the emergency department with crippling depression and thoughts of suicide. It is the mandate of physicians, practitioners, and other professionals to support and protect these people. Unfortunately, the treatments and medications currently available are insufficient, something that those delivering care on the front lines all struggle with. Ketamine has an amazing safety profile and is considered an essential medication by the World Health Organization. I've been using it to help emergency patients for 25 years, but under current physician regulations, when it comes to providing ketamine for mental health indications, I'm unable to provide it. At CATA Canada, we recognize the need for more effective treatments and are providing information and advocacy to make ketamine-assisted therapy readily available to every Canadian who needs it.
Welcome to the first annual World Psychedelics Day. My name is Shannon Smedella, and I am a spokesperson and business advisor as well as organizer for World Psychedelics Day. The International Psychedelics Awareness Foundation is a nonprofit organization welcoming collaborators and allies, upholding the values of sustainability, accessibility, diversity, and inclusivity. Any funds raised from this event, which is offered for free to the public today, will help offset the cost of production. So thank you for being here, because your participation and donations make it all possible. Without any further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce our guest for today's discussion. We have Dr. Devon Christie. She is the Medical and Therapeutic Services Director with Numinous Wellness. She is a clinical instructor with the UBC Department of Medicine and has a focused practice on chronic pain management. She's trained to deliver both MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD with MAPS USA and ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. She is a principal investigator and study therapist for a current Canadian MAPS PBC-sponsored 20-participant open-label clinical trial investigating MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD. For the last 15 years, Dr. Ben Sessa has been at the forefront of psychedelic research in the UK through his affiliations with Imperial College London. Ben is a consultant child and adolescent psychiatrist who has worked with young people and adults in the field of addictions and trauma-related psychiatry for over 20 years. He is now the Chief Medical Officer at Awaken Life Sciences, a company planning to open 20 psychedelic medical clinics throughout Europe, providing psychedelic psychotherapy, initially with ketamine, then with MDMA and psilocybin, for a wide range of psychiatric indications. He was one of the first medical cannabis psychiatric prescribers in the UK. Ben is an approved and registered MDMA and psilocybin therapist. Ben has led research into MDMA-assisted therapy for alcohol use disorder and is published widely in the academic and medical press. Ben is the co-founder and past chair of the Breaking Convention Conference. He is the author of The Psychedelic Renaissance 2012 and To Fathom Hell or Soar Angelic 2015. Dr. Michael Verbora is the medical director of Field Trip Health, a Canadian psychedelic therapy company with 6 locations operating in Toronto, New York, LA, Chicago, Atlanta, and Houston, and 6 more under construction in Amsterdam, San Diego, San Carlos, Seattle, Washington, DC, and Fredericton. Field Trip has become one of the largest providers of psychedelic therapies in the world, with clinics focused on providing space for ketamine-assisted therapy and conducting cutting-edge research on emerging psychedelic therapies and new psychedelic molecules. We are honored to have such an accomplished and dedicated panel of experts with us today. So thank you so much for joining us for World Psychedelics Day. So we will get right into our questions here for you guys. So I have a question to start it off for you all. What brought you to working with psychedelics, and why do you embrace them when there was so much negative messaging around them? So if we could start with you, Devon.
Thank you so much, Shannon. Yeah, before I answer your question, I want to just acknowledge that I'm here on the traditional and ancestral lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, also known as Vancouver, BC. And also just acknowledge my own cultural intersectionality as a white, cisgendered, heterosexual female, and that there are implicit biases and gaps in my perspective that I'm so grateful to all my friends and colleagues in the BIPOC and LBGTQ communities to help me be aware of these and point these out. And also just to acknowledge that the field of psychedelic research and psychedelic assisted psychotherapy has also historically disadvantaged these marginalized communities, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And until recently has only just begun addressing the impacts of systemic racism and structural oppression. So just wanted to start out with that and mention I'm wearing my Women in Psychedelics t-shirt, which is from the organization Chacruna, which is a nonprofit organization that's doing really great work to help really raise the voices of these communities, as well as contributing efforts to Indigenous reciprocity, and a lot of things that I think we need to acknowledge together collectively in this space. So with all that said, yeah, my own history and what brought me to this is it's been like I call it the journey down the rabbit hole of healing that has been my own healing journey that started early on in my life. I struggled with anorexia and bulimia when I was in my late teens, and depression, and I've had through my life head injuries, even PTSD. I've had experienced a lot myself, and I've also just been a characteristically open and curious person, and fascinated in understanding health and healing, which led me to medicine. And then after medicine, I just kept learning, and I learned with the Institute for Functional Medicine in the States, which was a much more holistic and systems biology lens on health and healing. And yoga and mindfulness, which had been a pillar of my own healing, was something that I then went and became certified to teach my patients, and which led me to understanding trauma and the impact of trauma on individuals, and which led me to becoming a trauma therapist. And then I was exposed to the field of psychedelics through both the work of Dr. Gabor Mate and his work with ayahuasca and people with substance use disorder, as well as the work of MAPS for post-traumatic stress disorder. And I found it incredibly inspiring and illuminating, and seemed to really synthesize everything that I've been learning along my journey up to that point. So I'm just really interested in helping to bring forward the tools and practices that are going to help individuals really truly heal and address the root causes of the illnesses that are, plaguing our society. And that's why I'm here. And stigma didn't matter to me. It's about really looking at the evidence and the research and what works, and the cultural influences on stigma, and what we need to collectively work to shift and change.
Thank you so much, Devon. And that's amazing background. Thank you for sharing that with us and for all of the work you're doing in the world. Ben, what brought you to this area of work?
Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for organizing this wonderful event. I won't repeat what Devon said regarding issues of diversity and exclusivity and inclusivity, other than to say I echo those completely. A really important part of the way we move forward is increasing diversity and inclusivity in this field, as everywhere. So I had notable teenage psychedelic experiences, then went to medical school. I was 18 years old in 1990, just as the rave scene was crashing into existence in the UK. I was living in London. I was a DJ. I was exposed to MDMA. And because I was already well read in the subject of the beat, poets, and psychedelic music and psychedelic culture and literature, I always had this kind of academic side to my interest in psychedelics. And as I went through medical school, I would ask people about these, and nobody knew anything about them. I then went on to qualified as a doctor, and then went on to do psychiatry. And I would ask my tutors, because I knew about the research, what can you tell me about the work done by Sanderson and Osmond and the groups in Canada and elsewhere in the 50s? And they all said, what are you talking about? That's crazy. That never happened. LSD is a dangerous addictive drug. If any of your patients ever have that, you have to tie them down to a table and inject them with chlorpromazine. That's the treatment. I was like, I was suddenly struck with this realization that this entire history of psychedelics in psychiatry had been kind of erased from the medical curriculum. So in 2004, as a trainee, I wrote a paper which became the UK's first medical paper on psychedelics since the 60s. That was published in the British Journal of Psychiatry. And then started to meet, I went to the Basel conference in 2006, 2008. It was tiny at that point. You could go to one conference and meet everyone in the world involved in the medical side. A few years later, I met a chap called David Nutt, and I introduced him to the concept of psychedelic medicine. At that point, he was a very biological top-down psychiatrist. So I kind of opened his eyes to the concept of psychopharmacology combined with psychotherapy. So it was all that kind of academic literature interest, personal experience. But then the one thing that then has since driven me in the last 15, 20 years of my career has been the recognition and observation of the lack of safety and efficacy of current traditional psychiatry interventions, and just seeing my patients fail, seeing too many children and young people and adults lose the battle to unremitting trauma-based disorders, seeing the lack of efficacy and the harm induced by a daily maintenance model of biological psychiatry prescribing, a lack of effectiveness psychotherapy, a difficulty in patients engaging in psychotherapy. And all of these things came together to bring to the conclusion that the psychedelics represent the most innovative, effective, and hopeful new approach to psychiatry that we've had for the last 75 years of modern psychiatry. And so we have to be very careful not to be overly messianic about how psychedelics can move us forward. But I take a very sober, conservative approach in a way. This is good, strong, evidence-based medicine. This isn't woo. This isn't driven by even the indigenous use in many ways. It's driven, as far as I'm concerned, by good, solid, excellent science that has an opportunity to help and progress this massive tide of mental health epidemic that Devon mentioned that is across the globe now. And we are in desperate need of this. And it works, and it's safe, and it's efficacious, and it's efficient. And it would be crazy to not see this moving forward. So in terms of stigma, I similarly like Devon, I cut past stigma because most of the negative and erroneous attitudes are based on erroneous data, which is if there's one thing the war on drugs has been fantastically effective at for the last 50 years, it's poisoning the minds of otherwise intelligent and erudite people to have a knee-jerk negative reaction to psychedelics, when you have to spend less than 4 minutes looking at any data and you see how safe and efficacious these things are and how wrong drug policy is. So I don't worry about stigma because I have not yet ever met a decent argument against them. And so I continue to push forward in terms of my worthy patients and what they deserve. And I think the next stage, and this is where myself and Michael are very aligned, is bringing these to the masses. They are too good to stay in the small exclusive group of users who've used them thus far in the world. They deserve to be in mass public healthcare, and that's what we're doing. We're rolling out, we're moving away from academic research into mass public healthcare and massive inclusivity for the people who deserve them. So I'm very excited to be part of this.
Wow, thank you so much, Ben. Very important words and very powerful there. So Michael, how did you make the leap into working with psychedelics?
Thanks so much for having me. And I just want to say it's a privilege to share the stage with Devon and Ben, who are exceptional leaders in this space. And yeah, this is really a remarkable opportunity for healthcare, for people to really write a new chapter in how they're going to approach their health And for me, it really starts from my perspective as a resident medical doctor in family medicine a number of years ago. And I really thought to myself, how am I going to keep prescribing these drugs for the next, 70 years, because most doctors never retire, and do what I'm doing, because I didn't enjoy it. I was not happy, and my patients were not getting better. And I had to be honest with my observation and trust my instincts. And so I actually turned to medical cannabis, and I had to relearn everything I learned about medical cannabis, because what I discovered was that the truth was very different than the education I was presented in Western medicine. And so I had to confront that beast prior to graduating, and it really set off a whole new course for me. And I've been very blessed and fortunate to have treated and helped, 10,000 patients use cannabis, whether it's pediatrics with epilepsy or autism, or oncology patients, to patients with opioid and benzodiazepine dependence and addiction. And I know in my heart that my oath that I took is to first do no harm. And I was just struggling so much as a young junior doctor, prescribing these opiates, prescribing these benzos, following my mentors or my colleagues' opinions on what to do. I just knew in my heart that wasn't the right approach for my patients. At least that wasn't resonating with me. And I wanted to connect with patients from that do no harm perspective and that oath that I took. And cannabis for me at that time, once I educated myself, was far, far safer than the other alternative options I was being told that I should prescribe, because they fall under the umbrella of evidence-based medicine. In my opinion, at the time, it was just very biased. And so through my journey with cannabis and seeing remarkable outcomes and reductions in opiates, benzodiazepines, improvements in sleep, reduction in sleeping pills, watching children go from being significantly disabled to living a normal life with epilepsy, I witnessed some what I would call miracles in front of my eyes. And that energy has led me to this moment to kind of take my learnings from opening 20 or 30 clinics across Canada with medical cannabis and training 100 doctors and destigmatizing and advocating for medical cannabis. I want to take everything I've learned there and bring this to psychedelics. And so I'm very blessed and fortunate to be the medical director at Field Trip Health. And what I'm trying to do is take that same passion that I had for medical cannabis with respect to destigmatizing, education, and advocacy. And I want to bring that to the psychedelic space.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Michael, and for being here with us today. And thank you all for the great work that you are doing. I have a question here first for Ben. So you worked alongside legendary researcher, Professor David Nutt, while you were doing research at Imperial College London in the UK. What were some of the biggest takeaways for you from that work, and what was discovered there?
I work with him and still do. I speak to David and see him 2 or 3 times a week. We've worked very closely together since 2007 when I joined his department there. I mean, that came about really interestingly when I wrote a letter to the Journal of Psychopharmacology criticizing David. He wrote a very scathing attack on psychotherapy and talked about how it's so unregulated and how the pharmaceutical industry is far better regulated and psychotherapy needs to learn a thing or two. I wrote a very critical reply that was published saying, you really want to hear about these things called psychedelics, where we see this wonderful marriage of psychotherapy and psychopharmacology. He invited me to the department and I ended up joining and have been alongside him ever since. And he's been very much a mentor for me. And I got involved in the beginnings of the psilocybin research there. I actually became the first person in the UK to be legally administered a psychedelic when I was injected with intravenous psilocybin by David Nutt here in Bristol in the hospital. And that study then turned into there was a wonderful young fresh-faced PhD student who just joined called Robin Carhart Harris, and he was in the department, and myself, Robin, and David have been this trio together for the last 15 years. And so those studies that Robin was doing with psilocybin then turned into the fMRI studies for psilocybin, and then into the multimodal imaging with Meg. And then they expanded to LSD, and then it's now DMT. So this has become like a central neuroscience center for understanding the neurobiology of psychedelics. And it's no great surprise that the work that we found there is that they're all very similar, those 3 classic psychedelics, in terms of their mode of action and how they work in the brain, despite having mildly different subjective effects. So it's the thing I've learned from most from actually working with David is just what a lovely man he is. He's a very, very inspirational person. Everybody he's has this tremendous capacity to listen to every single voice in the room and has no interest in hierarchy. You know, a tiny junior student who's just joined the department 2 days ago, in David's eyes, has equal weighting to some ancient elderly professor who's been in the room for 40 years. And that tremendous capacity I've found very deeply inspiring, and like to operate in the same way, both personally and professionally, because it is the younger people who have the ideas there. And of course, what I've found in recent years is moving away from this. I'm not really a scientist. I'm not really an academic. I mean, I've done all this research for the last 15 years because that was the only way I could work with the molecules I wanted to work with in a research capacity. I'm a doctor. I'm a clinician. I can't wait to get out there seeing patients delivered in non-clinical, non-research protocols, which is what's driven me in terms of setting up Awaken and turning this academic fringe research field into real public healthcare. And David is alongside me with all of that. So what a lovely man. And if you ever come to Bristol, you must come and hang out with us both.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. You did bring up neurobiology, and we hear the term neurogenesis, thrown about a lot lately, hearing the brain after injuries for healing and so forth. So how exactly does that work? Is it the drug that's doing that, or is it the mind and the brain? For example, is it how the thought process changes or the pathway of electrical signals? And that can be for anyone.
What do you think a thought is, Shannon, if it's not a material basis? We're getting quite Cartesian here. I mean, if you take a purely reductionist point of view, then there is only a material basis behind behind human consciousness, but people have a very wide range of views on that subject.
I think, I also think it's the language and terminology and how we describe what's happening with psychedelics really depends on the lens that you're using to look at it, right? So from a very reductionist material perspective, we are looking at dendritic arboring and new connections and neuroplasticity and all these things that we know these substances, or we're learning these substances, can induce quite profoundly, as can other things like exercise and fasting and other things. But if we're looking from a phenomenological lens at people's experiences, that's giving us another understanding of how these therapies might be working. And that's where we bring in qualitative research and a lot of the important insights that are coming from parallel qualitative studies to the more empirical quantitative studies that are proving the efficacy of these treatments. Things like attitudes and beliefs, and taking a psychological lens on personality traits and trait openness and what that means, and enhanced flexibility of thinking and creativity. And another lens is looking at connectivity networks in the brain, something that Robin Carhart-Harris has been such a leader in, with some of the research published there. So less looking at necessarily chemical effects or physical effects, but how the brain is connecting in real time, and the connections between different hubs in the brain, and then extrapolating, how this parallels one's phenomenological experience or real lived experience to try to learn, what might be going on. And there's some really fascinating theories around that, including just this sense of our very hardwired or fixed connected pathways that we're operating on, most of us, all of us, day to day, and the possibility of psychedelics to relax these pathways and allow for a greater repertoire of connections, which might allow us to experience new insights and experience ourselves in very different ways in real time. So I think we just have to look at what lens we're looking through. And then what's fascinating is to overlay these lenses on each other to really learn. And psychedelics are giving us such great insight into the nature of human consciousness and what drives us. And I think relevant to our conversation today, which I hope we'll get into in terms of behavior change and health behavior change and the relevance that these therapies may have beyond mental health, but to health in general.
Thank you so much, Devon. Michael, do you have anything to add to that?
Not too much. I agree with everything mentioned. I look at the role of psychedelics and even just healthy practices of meditation and exercise, which are neuroplastic. I really believe in that fundamental neuro flexibility model, which is how can we allow people to create for themselves a wide range of neuroflexibility so that they can adapt to the situation that's in front of them. And I think that's what psychedelics open the door to, as well as other healthy practices. And that just builds a little bit more resilience and coping mechanisms for individuals long term.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Thank you very much. So in psychedelics, people who are taking this therapy can have out-of-worldly experiences. So just to confirm, all of these experiences happen in the brain, correct?
My take on this is there's a wonderful book by Alan Watts called Does It Matter? Which is about a completely different subject. It's about comparative religions, really, but it doesn't matter. I take a clinical perspective. I don't really care what's going on in the brain or outside the brain. I care about my patient and their functional and behavioral and lifestyle changes. Now, if they want to conceptualize this as a spiritual or transcendent experience, that's great. If they want to experience it as a turning on or off of the default mode network, that's great. What it comes down to is, how are you doing? Are you seeing your kids these days? Did you get your job back? Are you back with your husband? You know, these, I think, and this opens a really interesting question, because here we are talking about the lofty subjects of brain versus mind, but actually we could equally talk about the concept of categorical diagnoses in psychiatry. And one of the things that psychedelics are doing as part of this renaissance is they're not only opening whole new clinical applications, but we're challenging some of the roots of how we even define and conceptualize mental health problems or people in general. I've been a psychiatrist for over 25 years. I've never met a patient with depression or anxiety or eating disorders or schizophrenia or bipolar disorder or personality disorder, which seems like a strange thing to say. I met thousands of individuals with idiosyncratic clusters of selfness, which cannot be categorized. So I don't think it matters what's going on. The question is, how is this of helping the patient to move forward and to achieve? And as long as we hold on to that, the patients are the boss. We work for them, and they will let us know where they want to go, and we will be alongside them while they go on that journey. And it's a tremendous privilege.
Yeah, I would also like to chime in too, that the question that is this happening in the brain, it's kind of, you can see the influence of Western biomedicine and the biological psychiatry model that, you know, has many people in society thinking, oh, depression is a chemical imbalance in the brain, and then we're going to fix it by giving a drug that's going to fix that chemical imbalance. And, you know, Ben, I followed your work and wholeheartedly agree that we need to bust a lot of these, you know, previously held notions of what is happening and why are people ill, and change. This is part of this paradigm shift we're talking about, moving away from biological psychiatry to looking at what are the root causes, what are the factors that are contributing to vulnerabilities from this more transdiagnostic understanding of health and illness, where we look at the impact of childhood development and the development of the brain, the influence of adversity and adverse experiences, and relational deprivation and neglect, and how this sets a person up with vulnerabilities. And certainly there's the influence of genetics and other aspects of an individual that might influence how those adversities manifest in terms of symptomatology, which, you know, psychiatry and medicine has, you know, done well to kind of categorize and put in these little silos. But part of this shift that psychedelics is helping us to learn about and to see is actually there are similar processes happening across a range of conditions that we would hitherto have felt or referred to as very discrete entities. And we're seeing how can we bring interventions forward that move past biological psychiatry, acknowledge the importance of psychotherapy, of the importance of healthy and healing relationships between humans, and what that brings to actually help to heal and influence and bring resilience, as Mike was saying, into a person's way that they're operating and relating to themselves and to the world. And if adverse childhood experiences can set us up for vulnerabilities to mental illness, not only mental illness and substance use and addiction, but also to chronic disease as it shows up as diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer, which speaks to the fact that, mind, body, we can't separate them anymore. Mental health and physical health, they're not discrete entities as well, same as, certain mental health disorders are not. We can also look that perhaps the experiences rendered through very powerful effects of these medicines in a safe environment with well-trained professionals who really know how to hold this, can actually start to address these vulnerabilities and help people actually rebuild and build brain architecture, attitudes, changes in behavior and perspective that actually foster resiliency, that heal the roots of trauma, and actually have an effect across a range of diagnoses, but coming from a similar mechanism as we're understanding what healing is.
I wouldn't add too much. Those are beautifully said, and I agree. And the key theme that comes up for me when we talk about this speaks to the paternalism around medicine and the challenges that we have. It's very paternalistic and still in a structure of an authoritative structure where a doctor knows best, and we don't. The truth is, and what I tell my patients is, like, you know best. Like, you're with yourself 24/7, and I'm merely a conduit to try to hold space so that you can help figure that out for yourself. And so whether the experience or the way that they envision the programming that changes for them is an external thing or an internal thing is not something I'm going to push my specific views on. I'm open to whatever narrative or metaphor that they want to use to describe it, as long as it's one that allows them to move forward.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Michael. Devon, you had mentioned using psychedelics to heal along a range of different medical conditions. How can psychedelics be used to heal a range of conditions in medicine? And how do psychedelics get to that root cause of the problem? And then another thing onto that is, why are they more effective than antidepressants, for example?
Well, I think those questions we're still learning the answers to. I think as we learn more about how these therapies are working, we can answer with more certainty. But from what we're learning thus far, we do see that the psychedelics can help individuals to access new pathways, new insights, new ways of thinking and approaching themselves, their relationship to the world, their relationship to their environment. We know that psychedelics help to promote pro-social attitudes, where people feel more inclined afterwards to go and sign up for volunteering and community organizations. They help foster a sense of greater connection with oneself and one's environment and the people around them. The introspective effects of psychedelics engendering feelings of self-compassion, self-love, and these types of experiences that are profound. And when we look at the mystical experience or mystical type of experience in the dimension of the noetic quality, which means these insights and perspectives that folks are have a sense of profound truth, or can have a sense of profound truth for an individual. So when we acknowledge that psychedelics engender these types of experiences, and then we look at health behavior change and what helps an individual make changes in their lifestyle, in their diet, in their sleep habits, in the ways that they're taking care of themselves. It stands to reason that there's a lot there supporting a profound shift that's, yes, translating into improved mental health outcomes, but we're seeing in the accessory data collected in some of this research that's being done and in the qualitative outputs that there are, perhaps surprising changes in other areas of individuals' lives, perhaps thought as separate from their depression, maybe, but that they're making in these behavior changes. There's actually a really important paper published recently by Pedro Teixeira, Matthew Johnson, and others on psychedelics and health behavior change. So I reference this paper. It's really good, and it posits a lot of possible ways that psychedelics can truly help people change these aspects of health that translate over time into whether illness or health are the emergent properties. And again, it takes us away from a reactive disease care model, which is what our current healthcare system is essentially established around. People get sick and then they go and access healthcare services and are largely given medications to palliate their symptoms. Whereas I think the way psychedelics can contribute, in addition to functional medicine and other approaches to health and wellness that look at these predisposing factors and perpetuating factors that are either keeping people sick or keeping people well, and actually shifting towards a disease prevention model. A model that fosters wellness and helps individuals establish the foundation for wellness in their lives. So I see that is to a large degree how I hope psychedelic assisted psychotherapy is going to help individuals across a range of health conditions. We know that stress, diet, lifestyle, exercise, sleep impact all conditions profoundly. And so if psychedelics are really helping to impact individuals' choices in these areas, then we can extrapolate and hope to see. And I hope that the research helps to support and prove that psychedelic assisted psychotherapies will indeed make a wave of impact across health conditions. The other piece too, quickly, is around trauma and traumatic stress, and how that's such a profound perpetuating factor and predisposing factor to negative health outcomes, and how, especially in the work that I'm involved in with MDMA assisted psychotherapy, psychedelics are an incredible tool to help individuals heal trauma. One, in a way, that is beyond anything hitherto known to at least modern Western medicine. The outcomes of the MAPS clinical trials showing 67% of individuals with severe post-traumatic stress no longer meeting diagnostic criteria in the recent phase 3 study, and in previous phase 2 studies, which actually improved over time, over a year after the phase 2 data was published, which again speaks to shifts in attitudes, shifts in behaviors, shifts in how somebody relates to themselves in their lives, that they're actually improving over after a brief intervention. Whereas most medical interventions, they don't follow up for that long. And if they do, often you see sort of a drop off in a treatment's effect. So those are some of the main things that I would see as contributing.
Thank you so much. And I do have some other questions for you on MDMA therapy as well. But Ben or Michael, did you want to answer on that primary question there?
I'd like to just go. I echo everything that Devon said there. I mean, it might not surprise you to learn that my approach to how psychedelics work is very based in developmental psychology as a child and adolescent psychiatrist. I would go one step further than what Devon just said at the end there, that the effect size between childhood trauma and adult personality formation and later mental and physical health issues is the strongest effect size in all of medicine. You damage a child, you damage the adult. It is absolutely well known. And we have to be careful when we say that sort of thing, because we don't want to say to a patient, I'm really sorry, your first 5 years were screwed up, then we can't do anything for you. And we'd all be out of a job if that was the case. But what we do know with great certainty is the quality of that early attachment is so profoundly important for the development of human psyche. It's those early pre-verbal even years where we learn the fundamentals. What is love? What is trust? What is pain? What is a brother? What is a sister? What is a mother? Is it okay to drop litter? Is it okay to lie? Is it okay to cheat and steal? These things we learn when we are that high, and we don't lose them. We hold on to them for life. They become incredibly rigid. And as a result, we then fall into certain behavior patterns that validate those personal experiences of self and world. So I was fortunate enough to be loved and cared for and played with and praised and told I was beautiful and I'd do really well. And that's what I believe. And I was told the world is full of wonderful, kind, charitable people who are out to help me. And you would be very hard pushed to change my mind about that and say, actually, Ben, you're a horrible, mean, rotten old person and nobody likes you and the world is full of horrible people. I just wouldn't believe you if you told me that. So why would my patients believe me when I try and tell them otherwise? They are absolutely convinced that they are terrible, awful people who deserve to be hurt and exploited. It's their fault and nothing will change and no one is to be trusted. Now, this is what underpins the chronicity of all mental disorders, especially addictions and PTSD, but also the affective disorders and the anxiety disorders. Underpinning it is this rigidity of self and world narratives that form from a very early age. And they're very hard to shift because we survive by them. That kid got out of childhood alive by not trusting anyone. If that kid walked with its open arms to that primary caregiver who was kicking, punching, burning, and raping it, it would have died before the age of 5. So it learned. It's interesting. PTSD is almost a positive neuroadaptive response. If you don't get PTSD, there's something wrong with your brain. It's your brain, your amygdala, knuckling down and telling you to fear everything or you're going to die. But the trouble is, you then grow up out of childhood and you come into the big wide world, and people are not assailants. People are not bad, but you can't help, your brain is in hangover from those early years. And then you go, and it profoundly affects how you have intimate relationships with people. And you feel attacked, and you feel hard done by, and you feel an assailant at every corner when there aren't any. And so this is what underpins the chronicity of all these mental disorders. And I will get on to psychedelics here. And the maintenance therapies that we use paper over the cracks and treat the symptoms. They treat the depression, the poor sleep, the mood instability by taking this drug every single day to mask these symptoms, symptom control. They don't get to the root cause of the trauma because by the time the patient's in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and they're addicted to heroin and alcohol and in and out of hospital, they've become experts at avoiding those issues. They will do anything to not talk about that night when they were 10 years old. And who can blame them? I would take heroin or alcohol or anything else to stem my pain if I was in pain. So we then come along and tell them to give up these things. And so what psychedelics do so profoundly above any other pharmacology we've come across is they radically shake up the narratives. So not only do you lose the things like I am good, I am bad, the world is safe or dangerous, you even lose what is gravity, what is color, what is space, what is time. So everything is up for grabs in this Carhart-Harris unlinked but also hyperlinked brain. Now, when everything is up for grabs, and none of these narratives are no longer sacrosanct or true, then when you come back from that ego dissolution experience, you have the opportunity with good guided psychotherapy to bring back the narratives you want and discard the ones you don't. So when you've had an experience where you are floating in time and space, suddenly that little narrative of that thing that happened to me all those years ago, I don't need that anymore. I've seen what it's like to explode into 1,000 galactic suns. I really don't need to worry about that. So more so than any other pharmacology or psychotherapy intervention, we have this opportunity to attack the rigidity of narratives. And I think that's the power of psychedelics. And it requires enormous skill on the part of the therapy and the protocols to get that right. Because experiences left unintegrated can often be less helpful. So that's really how they're, in a nutshell, what they're doing. They're giving you an infinite realm of new possibilities to help you to attack the rigidity of what you thought you knew about yourself and the world. And when that's done with skill and preparation and guidance and integration, it's immensely powerful.
Thank you so much. And given what we are all currently going through in the world right now, would you say that psychedelics are even more necessary going forward?
I think we'd probably all agree with that. I would.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think that's why each of our organizations, Awaken, Field Trip, Numinous, are pushing forward to try and translate what we're seeing in clinical research into clinical practice at lightning speed. You know, it typically takes almost a couple decades for a new intervention to hit the mainstream in our medical system. So there's an urgent need, and I'm sure, you know, why I'm motivated to be working with Numinous to do this is to really harness the capital and the resources of an organization like ours to bring these to the people as quickly and as safely as we can, because we don't have that time to wait.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just want to add that, you know, the wisdom that Ben and Devon just shared about the entire, you know, pathophysiology, if you want to call it that, of illness. I just take a breath, because it's so fundamentally different than the approach that we take today in Western medicine, and just palliating some minor symptoms. It does not let people get to that biopsychosocial spiritual center. And that's what we're here to do, is to recognize that the elements of health are far more complex than biochemistry. I think the fact that we think that everything lies in biochemistry is extremely primitive. And, you know, we haven't even talked about the physics of the body. We have very, very minimal understanding of it. So I would just encourage everyone to take a breath there and pause or listen to that again, because it's just a fundamental shift in the way that we're going to do things.
Yeah, and it's a new paradigm, but it's also an old paradigm, because when you look at traditional systems of healing, traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, and all the indigenous wisdom and knowledge systems, there is an acknowledgement of that we are, you know, we are not only physical beings, we're emotional beings. We have our thoughts, we have our psychology, we also have our relationship to whatever we might call it, the unknown, the great mystery that we might call spirituality, and that all of these parts of ourselves are absolutely important and fundamental to our health and well-being. So yeah, I
We also
agree.
have all the social factors, which is so important. You know, you can give someone a ton of Prozac, or you can put them into CBT for 20 years, or you can give someone a ton of DMT. They're not going to get better if they live in that lousy house with that lousy job, with those poor relationships and their transgenerational lack of hope. You know, we could close the hospitals and prisons tomorrow with better social care and support for single mothers with children under 5. You know, so much of what we call health or even spiritual problems are physical, social problems. There was a wonderful paper written years ago that postulated what would happen, the sheer cost of a lifetime of mental health treatment on someone, if you were to say to them in their very early years, I'm going to give you £10 million and you're never allowed to go to a hospital ever. And it was a great paper, because they postulated that that person would be fit and healthy, you know. So there are social impacts that we need to do. And I think, in a way, like you say, Devon, this isn't new, and it's not, you don't just need to go back to ancient medicine. I think that American psychiatry has a different feel, as far as I can understand, because I was certainly, from the very beginning of my medical training, taught about the importance of social and psychological factors. I haven't had a top-down biological education in medicine at all. And maybe that's just a child and adolescent type approach. But, you know, ignore the social and psychological at your peril, because no amount of medicine is going to get that patient better if you don't look after those parts of them, their relationships, their family, their children, their hopes and dreams and aspirations. And psychedelics have this wonderful way of spontaneously bringing that out. Someone once said to me, try taking a large dose of LSD and go to a supermarket. You will just be in fits of laughter as you glance around and realize that 98% of the things on the shelves are totally superfluous and unnecessary for our life. And so psychedelics have this wonderful ability to shine a light of what's really important in your life. And so when we hone that with good, effective social and psychological support, we can help people, like Mike said, to help themselves, and they will take us on their journey. And we work for them. And we have to hand that locus of power and control back to them, and they will show us what they need.
And I think, Ben, to add on too, I think I would say maybe lip service, or, I was exposed to Engel's model of biopsychosocial health in my medical training as well over a decade ago. But it's where the rubber hits the road in terms of where our governments are funding and where dollars are being allocated for services. And it's by and large predominantly physical reactive healthcare services. We don't have universal access here in Canada. We have universal healthcare, but there is not universal access to mental health services, to psychotherapy. And yes, we need to shift to this sense of relationship-centered care, understanding that connection and community and opportunities to get out of isolation and out of toxic, isolated environments is what's really going to bridge us to healing individually and collectively. And so we need to be creating models where that becomes possible. So I wholeheartedly agree. We may have an understanding of this, but it's actually about implementing it into our systems.
Thank you so much, Devon. Michael, is there anything you wanted to comment on there?
No, I was just going to pose a question to everybody and just ask, we talked about how this is such a historical practice, old things are new again, but what can we do better this time to protect it long term? And how do we also, introduce it in the context of, Western economies and societies? It's sometimes there's conflicts at play, and I'm just wondering how you guys deal with these, and what should we do as an industry and individuals leading it to cautiously grow this industry in a intuitive and respectful and conscious manner?
Great question.
That is a great question, Mike. And I think all of us, where we are in the field, have a tremendous responsibility here to ensure that this works properly. One thing Albert said just before he died in 2008 was, when the psychedelic renaissance occurs, the doctors must not be allowed to run the show. And I think that's absolutely right. And I don't think they are. And, what have we learned? We've learned an awful lot. And if you look at the protocols for psychedelic therapies, they are very, very much paying attention to setting and preparation and guidance and integration. There's no psychedelic therapists out there who just say, take a big load of DMT and I'll never see you again. Nobody's doing this. So we are already developing psychedelic protocols that have all of these biopsychosocial inputs, and the spiritual and the indigenous, and what we've learned from thousands of years of non-medical practice. So I'm very confident that we are moving in that right direction. But a caveat to that is also, and this is where I get myself in conflict with a lot of people in the psychedelic community, we also need to be realistic about what are the realities of drug development and healthcare provision on a public, massive scale. You can't do it on the back of an envelope. You have to have corporations and pharmaceutical industries and governments and banks and investors. It's extremely expensive to make public healthcare systems. And so whilst the well-meaning and noble intentions of a lot of people who are perhaps fearful of seeing a psychedelic industry, a lot of them don't necessarily understand the realities of what it is to have a healthcare system for the masses. It requires a lot of organization and money. It requires us meeting the authorities where they are. So yeah, like the cognitive liberty argument, it's my right to get high. That's a great argument. I love that from an ethical point of view, but actually it's a rubbish argument when it comes to policy change. People have been shouting at governments for 75 years, it's my right to get high, it's my brain, it's my chemistry, but actually it's got nowhere. It's when we cut our hair, put on a tie, wore a white coat, did the research, brought home the data, that we started to see shifts in policy change. So we've got to be realistic. Whilst we want to hold on to the principles of the beauty and majesty and wonder of psychedelic sacraments, we have to also remember that as far as the FDA, EMA, and MHRA are concerned, these are drugs, these are chemicals. They have to jump through all the same hoops as aspirin, paracetamol, and penicillin. No different. The rules are no different for psychedelics. They're slightly more difficult because they're not licensed, because they're scheduled, but they're no more stringent than any other drug development. So we have to follow those rules. And that's frustrating, I think, for some parts of the psychedelic community who just say, oh, why are you working with the man, with pharma, with governments? But we are, because that's how we're going to get this over the line. And I don't think there's another way of doing it. And it's about finding the right language to do that whilst holding on to the beautiful and wonderful principles of the psychedelic experience.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I think, as you say, we all here on this panel and others in our peers in the field have a tremendous amount of responsibility to bring the wisdom and the awareness and the learning that we get from being involved in the research and from being connected with, as I have been, to traditional use and indigenous use and different settings where psychedelic medicines have brought community together, have been in service to healing. So with this knowledge, we are positioned within the existing structures that do have relevance and importance in terms of assuring safety and many other things, but to actually be a voice for the things that are countercultural within medicine, that are the paradigm changes that we've been speaking to today in this call. And to hold to that, because there is just this, people want a magic bullet. They want to consider like, oh, it's the psychedelic that's going to be the panacea. In fact, no, it's a catalyst to a change process that requires a very specific environment and requires trained individuals to be holding that space and creating spaces where integration can happen on a community level and people can start to support one another more. So I think also what's important too is to be committed as individuals to creating more space for marginalized voices or historically marginalized voices to inform what we're doing. Because I think there's a lot of wisdom and a lot of knowledge that's held there that has been systemically erased or silenced in the systems that we have. So it's a tremendous work, but I mean, if not us, who? And now is the time. And although each of us is working with different companies, I think it's really important for us to be having these kinds of communications and realizing where we can be values aligned and be really allies in stewarding this forward.
Michael, do you have anything to add?
No, I just love hearing that, and it's just so exciting. But yeah, my anxiety stems from, not overly westernizing these therapies and making sure we bring in these traditions. And I think a lot of us are doing our best to do that and then fit the pieces that are required into the model to, accelerate it through the FDA, et cetera. So it's an interesting challenge that is very unique, I think, to, this crashing of Eastern and Western philosophies simultaneously. And it's nice to hear, wisdom trying to merge both and give space for both.
And we're stronger together, aren't we, Mike? And, you
Absolutely.
and I were on a call earlier this week, and I've got a call coming up with Compass in a couple of days, and I've got a call with MAPS tomorrow. I'd love to have a call with Numinous. I got a call with MindMed. I got a call with Atai. I think we need to move forward in the spirit of collaboration. We get tied down with these NDAs and don't talk about this patent and that patent. And of course, we have to abide by those corporate structures because the money, like I said, is important. We can't take that for granted. The biggest challenge to psychedelics becoming public healthcare instruments is actually financial. It's going to cost millions to do this. So we have to respect our CEOs who tell us to be very careful about our NDAs and what we talk about. But I'm not going to be silenced. I want to talk to you guys. I want to talk to the other competitors. You're not competitors. We're in the same space and we're doing it for the same reason, which is the betterment of public healthcare and our patients. And of course, we all have different approaches, and so we should, and that's great. But let's talk about this. And Mike and I were talking about this earlier in the week. I'd like to set up a conference for psychedelic CMOs and doctors, in which, whilst we'll all be fairly guarded about not talking about our respective companies private secrets and plans. We need to talk about our similarities much more than our differences, because then we are so much stronger together as a force.
Very well said, Ben. Thank you so much. We did talk about psychedelics and the paradigm changes and the new holistic model. Would you say that psychedelics are a medical game changer?
Yeah, I can take that first. So yeah, it is a game changer. It's just by definition of the types of work that you can do with psychedelics, you can get transformation. And so, people transforming their identity or their narrative or whatever it may be is a game changer for them. And so, but psychedelics, when I look at the word psychedelic and look, I'm still learning and I keep changing my mind is, I used to think of psychedelics as specific drugs. And now I kind of look at psychedelic as an umbrella of experiences that some drugs facilitate, but also mindfulness practices, exercise, a beautiful experience like the birth of a newborn can be very psychedelic experiences. And so I have a very, very broad view on the term psychedelic. And you can give somebody a placebo, right, and convince them that it's going to give them a psychedelic experience, and that may actually transform them. And so that just speaks to the power of, the transformation that's taking place with these drugs.
Yeah, I mean, the umbrella term of non-ordinary states of consciousness being these vehicles for transformation, I think a game changer in medicine. It's a game changer in our society because of the stigma and the cultural and governmental lockdown and repression of access to these opportunities for individuals. As we see that open up, whether it's through relaxed legislation around psychotropic substances for individuals, or whether it's within the healthcare and the medical paradigm of accepting and acknowledging the robust research that's speaking to the benefits of non-ordinary states of consciousness in transformative healing and in wellness. I think that the game changer is really bringing access back to the people to an awareness that there's potential benefit here, that we don't need to fear cutting loose from the narratives that we're largely fed through our culture, that we learn through our early developmental environments, that rather than something to be feared, with the right safeguards in place, it's something to be celebrated. And really, throughout history of humanity and this planet, cultures have evolved and civilizations have changed profoundly. To a large degree, it seems to be through anthropological research, through the influence of non-ordinary states of consciousness. So there's something that promote growth and promote new perspectives, and we need that now. Our planet needs that right now. So it's a game changer, yes, in healthcare and in medicine. I think for all of us alive on the planet right now in 2021, with our forests being cut down, with our oceans being polluted, with just the marching forward of what I hope will become the old ways of commodification and industrialization and sort of objectification of nature, and that we somehow own it for our own profit and benefit. So it starts to, there's these ripple effects where it may start in an individual and in their change process that ripples into their community and then ripples into society. And that's what I really hope that we'll see. I hope that's the game changer that actually happens here.
I think the game change will come rather boringly through structures and infrastructure and management of bringing this into free public healthcare. Otherwise, it's going to be a game changer for that 2% of white middle-class trustafarians who enjoy it so far. And that's not a game changer. That's just a plaything for the rich. And in some ways, we've spectacularly failed. LSD, 2% of the world's population have used LSD. It's been around for over 75 years. That's a terrible outcome for a product. For that 2% who do use it, will tell you it's the most profound experience of their life. Yet what's wrong with the other 98% of people? Why aren't they using it? That's a spectacular failure in terms of product delivery for something that is apparently so good. So where have we gone wrong there? So if we're going to have a game changer, it's got to be for everyone, not just the few. So actually, we need to be talking about really boring things like politics and governments and committees and public health care. We all know these things work. We all know that we don't need to do any more science. We all know they're very safe. We all know they're very effective. We could almost just scrap the entire psychedelic research program worldwide today and focus all our money on a fantastic advertising agency. That's what we need to do. They work, they're safe, and though that 2% of people who've taken them know that, but we need to get those doubters through the door. And it's only through that mass appeal that we're going to do that. And this is what's interesting about this concept of the psychedelic renaissance. People talk about the psychedelic 60s. The 60s were nothing like they are now. A tiny fraction of people used psychedelics in the 60s compared to today. Yet it had a huge cultural transformation on humanity. But actually the numbers of people using them was really quite small compared to the numbers that use them today. Like in swinging London in 1966, 67, with all of the cultural change of LSD, there were 1,500 people in the whole city using LSD for those years. That's, you know, you go to an average party here in Bristol tonight and there'll be 1,500 people in one room all on LSD. We have wonderful internet connectivity. We have groups, societies, conferences, festivals, like we've never had before. The most tremendous opportunity for massive public cohesion in this subject. We cannot afford to screw this up like we did the last time. And so we need to find the language that speaks to these two very disparate groups of those who are experienced and those who are cynics and doubters. And it's only going to be doing it through finding the language. And if we subscribe too much to a stereotypical hippie approach, we will lose that 98%. We just will, because we have for the last 50 years. So this means both sides need to accept some changes in the way they look at this, because there's an equal amount of irritating dogma in the psychedelic community as there is in the doubting community who consider that LSD makes you fly and one pill will kill when it comes to ecstasy. Similarly, there's a lot of poor pseudoscience in the psychedelic community that does not help the cause. So we need to attack this from all angles. The science is one part, the shifting hearts and minds through cultural change and literature and celebrities and television and getting it out there, and above all, providing a platform for free psychedelics under a public healthcare system that is not monopolized by a profit-driven pharmaceutical industry. And I believe we are doing that, all of us in our respective fields. And that's what's going to make it work, and that's what's going to make it a game changer.
And that resource allocation shift, what some of the narratives that we hear around, well, look, these psychedelic interventions, they're so expensive, they're so labor intensive, there's all this psychotherapy, it costs so much money. And certainly there is a price to it. The health professionals that are offering the intervention definitely need to be paid. And it's an intensive but brief intervention. So we have to look at it on time scale. How much are we spending on pharmaceuticals that people are taking for the rest of their lives versus a brief intervention? And also the stigma around invisible illness, whether that be mental health, PTSD, chronic pain, and it's really not getting the resource allocation that physical treatments like surgeries for your gallbladder or your heart, like obviously we need to pay for people to have that. Well, what's the cost of a surgery for a gallbladder that's done every single day, thousands of times, you know, for Canadians or Americans? It's a fair amount of money. The hospital stay, the operating room cost, the surgeon, everything adds up to thousands of dollars. And, you know, but nobody bats an eyelash at that because it's just accepted in the culture of medicine that, of course, we will, you know, take care of these things for individuals. So we need to reconceptualize the cost associated with psychedelic assisted psychotherapy and maybe consider it as like a psychological surgical intervention, a brief intervention that costs X amount of dollars, but very valid, because at the end of the line, many people no longer meet the criteria for the diagnosis you're treating. So I think we just need to really shift how we're looking at things and question our assumptions and biases, and do everything that we can before you even introduce the notion of a psychedelic, to together be a voice for the importance of mental health treatment, of psychotherapy as important interventions for individuals. Even if you just compare psychotherapy and drugs alone for the treatment of depression, they're often seen to be fairly equivalent in efficacy, but these ones have a bunch of side effects. This one's generally better tolerated and has a longer lasting impact. So, and that the next level from that is where we intelligently combine these in psychedelic assisted psychotherapy in the ways we've been talking about. So those are some of the, I think, boring but important conversations that we need to have about how our system is structured and how funding is allocated.
The beauty of psychedelics is exactly that. It's changing that perspective, right? We talk about the Overwatch effect of astronauts going up in space and getting a new perspective. It's the same thing with psychedelics. And Devon just, hit the nail on the head. We're so myopic in so many areas, from the way that we have a lack of sustainability in our environment, the way that our economic systems are driven for short-term gain at the expense of long-term sustainability. And so, I don't want to get overzealous here, but I do really believe that as individuals start to become their own healers, and we see this in our clinics, what they want to start contributing after they graduate from our programs. How can I help other patients? It's that connection. And I really hope that we can all get that big bird's eye view on, the whole world, the whole universe, so that we can really start to change all of these systems. And part of my anxiety that keeps me up at night is this technological revolution that we're going through, because it could be absolutely amazing for society, and it can also be very dystopian. And so we need that perspective so importantly to make sure that we build a better future.
We need hope. We need hope as mental health practitioners. I think I often say this. Psychiatry's dug itself into this hole of low expectation. We behave like we're palliative care doctors, because if you're presenting to a psychiatrist in your early 20s with a severe trauma-based disorder due to child abuse, there's a pretty good chance you're going to be talking to your psychiatrist when you're 70. And we just accept that. We don't even use the cure word in psychiatry. It's a dirty word. It's like, you can't cure people. You can get alongside them for life. I want to be like an orthopedic surgeon. When you go into the orthopedic surgeon, they mend your broken ankle and you never darken their doors again. You're discharged from the clinic and you're kicked out, and that's it. Your ankle is broken, is mended. And you don't expect a lifetime of palliative care on that ankle. Yet, if you say that to most psychiatrists, let's take a 25-year-old with a history of child abuse who's now presenting with alcoholism or opiate dependence or PTSD. Let's cure them and never see them again. Most psychiatrists would just laugh at you and tell you you're a fantasist. I think we actually need to start tackling our own sense of learned helplessness that we as psychiatrists have allowed ourselves to paint ourselves into. It's not appropriate. I do not want to be a palliative care doctor, with massive respect for palliative care doctors. I want to cure people. I do not want to see their faces again. I want to kick them out and know that they are better. Now, is that too much to ask as a doctor? But as a psychiatrist, we're not trained to ask that, because we just don't believe. And the reason we don't believe is because the tools we've been given, these daily maintenance drugs, these inefficient psychotherapies, just simply don't work. We need to get with the program, man, and get into the technologies, which are psychedelic-assisted psychotherapies, and change the facing of the way we do mental health care, together with the social issues that we talked about. Then we have a game changer.
Wow, those are definitely powerful words to end on here. And just being conscious of everyone's time, does anyone have any final words that they'd like to leave with us today on World Psychedelics Day?
Just really want to thank you, Shannon, and thank the organization for inviting us to speak and to connect with each other in this really lively panel, to learn and to hear how aligned we are in terms of our perspectives on our imperatives and our responsibilities, and where we are hoping to be leaders in the change and this psychedelic renaissance and real revolution in healthcare. So I'm just I feel honored and privileged to be at the table here with both you, Ben, and Mike, and I just want to express my gratitude.
I same back at you, Devon, and same back at you, Mike. You know, it's great to be having this discussion. I think the one message I'd like to give is, well, firstly, thank you for this wonderful platform, but secondly, to any young people that are watching this, it's not boring, stuffy old people like me who are going to do this. It's you. It's the young people who are going to do this, and have the courage to do this. I was taken aside early in my career and told, Ben, why are you working with psychedelics? This is career suicide. Why don't you work with something nice and wholesome like SSRIs? They could not have been more wrong. The tutor that told me that when I was in Oxford doing my postgrad, they could not have been more wrong. This is no longer some bizarre fringe subject just done by a bunch of beardos in California. This is cutting edge neuropsychiatry. This Yale, Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge, UCLA, UCL, Imperial, Cardiff, Bristol. These are not fringe organizations. These are mainstream neuroscientific centers, and they all have at the center of their neuroscience research psychedelic programs. It is cutting edge medicine. It's where we are in psychiatry. And if your tutors and your young person are putting you off, you just need to say to them, have you ever read one of your journals that you subscribe to? Because not a month goes by that psychedelic medicine is highly represented in high impact peer reviewed journals. This is where it's at. And we have to hold on to that, and we have to hold on to the wonderful and majesty of the psychedelic experience and our togetherness. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
I just want to say, if I can take some terminology from the crypto space and just say HODL, HODL, because you're going to have to hold on for dear life, because the next 5 to 10 years is going to be revolutionary. The amount of research, clinic expansion, and the paradigm shift that we're going to see in healthcare is going to be different, that if you close your eyes, you're going to miss it. And I think that's going to be a transformation. And I think a lot of people are going to have to confront their own confirmation bias as well. And that's going to be an interesting challenge for medicine, because we have to go through our moment. We're still really waiting for that to look in the mirror and ask ourselves, are we really, doing the right type of work? And how are we going to integrate this into the wide range of practices that all of us do? And so, yeah, hold on for dear life, because it's going to be exciting, and it's going to be transformative, and it's going to be for the betterment.
Well, thank you so much. So that wraps up our panel today. What a wonderful and important discussion on the future of psychedelic healthcare as a part of World Psychedelics Day. So thank you so much to the speakers who have taken their time out of their schedules to take a look at these important topics in the psychedelic sphere. And thank you to all of the sponsors for World Psychedelics Day and everyone that has contributed and also tuned in today to watch. So happy World Psychedelics Day.
Thank you.